What's going on, YouTube? This is with the one and only Kenneth Serene, reading off of the channel He Loves to Read. And today we're going to be reading our first book, which is called By the Philosophy of Plotinus, The Six Needs. It was translated by Stephen McKenna. Okay. Now, this is a philosophical book. Basically, Plotinus was a philosopher who he was more as like a metaphysical type of philosopher. Talking about things like the soul, the mind, and what's out there, how there's a higher being. So this is like a metaphysical, spiritual type of philosophy. I figured that it would be interesting to read and share with you guys. But by the end of this series, please comment below after every video that's been uploaded and put your insight and what you think about his philosophy and what you could add on. For as we all know, we are all thinkers by mind. All right, the first need. The animated man, right? I'm sorry, I forgot to go to the thing. Okay, so Plotinus, according to his biographer and disciple, Porphyry, seemed to be ashamed of being in a body and hence refused to tell anything about his parents, his ancestry, and his country. He is known, however, to have come from Egypt, and one ancient source claimed that he was born at Lycopolis, and now Asyut, in Upper Egypt. His parents evidently possessed some means. For the age of 8, Plotinus was attending a school of grammar. At Alexandria, when he was 28, Plotinus discovered his vocation as a philosopher. He had evidently been attending the schools and listening to the famous men of the city, then the intellectual capital of the world, but he failed to find any satisfaction until a friend to whom he had unburdened himself took him to hear the philosopher Ammonius. Ammonius Saccas, known as the God taught, right? Porphyry records that as soon as he had entered and heard Ammonius, Plotinus exclaimed to his friend, "That is the man I have been seeking." For 11 years, Plotinus was the disciple of Ammonius. It is possible that the master and his students led a kind of common life. Plotinus and two more of the group are known to have entered a compact to keep the secret of the doctrine of their master. Ammonius himself left no writings, and his teaching was probably concerned more with establishing the way of life than pursuing intellectual knowledge for its own sake. When Plotinus was at the age of 31, he left Ammonius. It was the 39. At the age of 39, Ammonius, it was with the decision to obtain direct knowledge of the philosophy practiced amongst Persians and honored among the Indians. The Emperor Gordon was then preparing to lead expedition to Persia, and Plotinus arranged to travel with the army. He reached Mesopotamia, but his plans for study was cut short when the emperor was assassinated, and Plotinus with which difficulty escaped to Antioch and then to Rome, where he arrived in 245 BC. For the next 25 years, Plotinus was a teacher of philosophy in Rome and something like the director of conscience. Among his followers, besides professional philosophers such as Porphyry, there was several physicians, senator, and a poet, a former rhetorician who had turned banker, and many distinguished women. One senator, as a result of his association with Plotinus, reached such a state of detachment that he abandoned all of his goods, dismissed his servants, and gave up all of his offices. Plotinus was approached for advice on all kinds of questions. Several wealthy people at their death confided the material and spiritual care of their children to him, and he took them into his house. The emperor Gallienus and his wife Salonia held him in particular esteem. Plotinus attempted to persuade them to establish a city in Campania, modeled after his Plato Republic, and to be known as Plato after Plato Republic, and to be known as Platonopolis. Only the opposition of the emperor advisor is supposed to have prevented the realization of the project. During the first 10 years that Plotinus was in Rome, he imitated his master, Omnius, and committed none of his teaching to his writing. This may have been partly due to his pledge to keep secret to his master's teaching, for after that pledge had been broken by others, he began to write. When Porphyry became his follower in 263, Plotinus had complete 21 of his 54 treaties, but their circulation was very restricted. Plotinus is supposed to have been indifferent to his writing. Much of it was done while he was in the midst of other tasks. He paid little attention to the necessities of Greek style, and because of his weakness of his sight, he did not reread his composition. He produced most of his work during the 6 years of Porphyry was with him. The questioning and the urging of Porphyry and other philosophers led him to write 24 treatises. The final 9 were written in the last 2 years of his life, while he was seriously failing in health. His writings were collected after his death by Porphyry. His arrangement of them in groups of 9 has given them the name of Enneads. The mode of his life, followed by Plotinus, was austere. He abstained completely from meat and paid little attention to elementary. Much of his time was given to meditation. Porphyry declared that his end and aims to was intimate union with God, who is above all things, and testified that during this time he knew him as Plotinus, attained this end 4 times. The school that Plotinus conducted in Rome depended almost entirely upon him, and it began to fail soon after the health of Plotinus, preventing him from giving it his usual attention. Almost blind, suffering from complication and disorders, Plotinus finally retired to the estate of his friend and disciple in Campania, where he died in 270. At the moment of his death, he reported to have declared to his friend, "Now I shall endeavor to make that which is divine in me rise up, that which is divine in the universe." So, ladies and gentlemen, that is basically a short little biography of Plotinus and who he was and what his life was like. Now we will proceed to the first chapter, called The First Aeneid. This is written in Plotnius words. The the enemy and the man, pleasure and distress, fear and courage, desire and aversion, where have these affections and experiences their seat? Clearly, either in the soul alone, or in the soul as employing the body, or in some third entity deriving from both. And for this third entity, again, there are two possible modes. It might be either a blend of or distinct form due to the blending. And what applies to the affection applies also to whatsoever acts, physical or mental, spring from them. We have therefore examined discursive reason and the ordinary mental action upon objects of sense, and inquire whether these have the one seat with the affections and experiences, or perhaps sometimes the one seat, sometimes another. And we must consider also our acts of intellect. Intellections, their modes and their seats. And this very examining principles which investigates and decides the matters must be brought to light. First, what is the seat of sense perception? This is the obvious, beginning since the affections and experiences either are sensations of some kind, or at least never occurred apart from the sensation. This first inquiry obligates us to consider at the outset of the nature of the soul. That is, whether a distinction is to be made between soul and essential soul, between an individual soul and the soul kind in self. If such distinctions holds the soul in a man is some sort of composite, and at once we may agree that it is a recipient, if only reason allowed that all affections and experiences really have their seat in the soul, and with the affections every state and mood, good and bad alike. All matters shown in brackets is added in the translators for clearness' sake, and therefore is not canonical. But if soul in a man and essential soul are one and the same, then the soul will be ideal forms, unreceptive of all those activities which it imparts to another kind, but possessing within itself that native act of its own which reason manifests. If this be so, then indeed we may think of the soul as an immortal. If the immortal, the imperishable, must be passive, giving out something of itself, but itself taking nothing from without except for what it receives for existence, prior to itself from existence, in that they are the nobler, it cannot be sundered. Now, what could bring fear to nature thus unreceptive to the outer? Fear demands feelings, nor is there a place for courage. Courage implies the presence of danger, and such desires are satisfied by filling or voiding of the body, must be proper to something very different from the soul, to that only which admits replenish and voidance. And how could the soul lend itself to any admixture? An essential is not mixed, or of the intrusion of anything alien. If it did, it would be seeking the destruction of its own nature. pain must be equally far from it. And grief, how or for what could it grieve? Whatever possesses existence is supremely free, dwelling, unchangeable, within its own particular nature. And can any increase bring joy where nothing, not even anything good, can accrue? What such an existence is it? It is unchangeably. Thus, assuredly, sense perception, discursive reasoning, and all our ordinary mentations are foreign to the soul. For sensation is receiving whether of an ideal form of an impassive body, and reasoning and all ordinary mental action deal with sensation. The question still remains to be examined in the matter of the intellections, whether these are to be assigned to the soul, and as to pure pleasure, whether this belongs to the soul in its solitary state. We may treat the soul as in the body, whether it's to be set above, actually within its sense. The association of the two constitutes one thing called the living organism, animate. Now, from this relations, from the soul using the body as an instrument, it does not follow the soul must be shared by the body's experiences. A man does not himself feel the experiences of the tools with which he is working. It may be objected to the soul. However, have sense perception, since its use of its instruments must be acquainted with the external conditions, and such knowledge comes by of sense. Thus, it will be argued the eyes are the instruments of seeing, and seeing may be distress to the soul. Hence, the soul may feel sorrow and pain and every other affection that belongs to the body, and from this again will spring desire, the soul seeking mending of its instrument. But we ask, how possibly can these affections pass from body to soul? Body may communicate qualities or conditions to another body, but body to soul, something happens to A. Does that make it happen to B? As long as we have agent and instrument, there are two distinct entities. If the soul uses the body, it is separate from it. But apart from the philosophical separation, how does soul stand to body? Clearly, there is a combination, and for this several modes are possible. There might be complete coalescence. Soul might be interwoven through the body, or it may be an ideal form detached to the ideal form in governing contact like a pilot, or there might be part of the soul detached and another part in contact, this disjoined part being the agent or user, the conjoined part ranking with the instrument being used. In the last case, it will be the double task of philosophy to direct this lower soul towards the higher, the agent, and the accept insofar as the conjunction is absolutely necessary to serve the agent from the instrument to the body, so that it needs not forever have its act upon through this inferior. Let us consider then the hypothesis of coalescence. Now, if there is coalescence, the lower is ennobled, and the nobler degraded. The body is raised in scale of being made participant in life. The soul, as associated with death and unreason, is brought lower. How can lessening of this life quality produce an increase such as self-perception? No. The body has acquired life. It is the body that will acquire with life sensation and the affections coming by sensation, desire, then will belong to the body as the object of desire, or to be enjoyed to the body, and fear too will belong to the body alone, for it's the body's doom to fail, of its joy to perish. Then again, we shall have to examine how such coessence could be conceived. We might find it impossible. Perhaps all this is like an announcing the coessence of things, utterly incongruous in kind. Let us say of the line and whiteness. Next, for the suggestion, the soul is interwoven through the body, such as relations would not give woof and warp community of sensation. The interwoven element might be very well suffer no change. The permanent soul might remain entirely untouched by what affects the body. As the light goes away, free of its floods, and all the more so, since precisely we ask to consider it as diffused through the entire frame. Under such an interweaving, then the soul would not be subjected to the body's affections and experiences. It would be present, rather ideal form and matter. Let us suppose the soul to be body as ideal form. The matter now, if the possibility the soul is an essence, a self-existence, it can be present only as separable form, and will therefore all the more decidedly be using principle, and therefore unaffected. Suppose the soul to be present like X form on iron. Here, no doubt, the form is all important, but it is still the X, the complement of iron and form, that affects whatever is effected by iron, thus modified on the analogy. Therefore, we are even more strictly compelled to assign all experiences of the combination to the body. Their natural seat is the material member, the instrument, the potential recipients of life. Compare the passage where we read that it is absurd to suppose the soul weaves, equally absurd to think of as desiring grieving. All this is rather in province of something which we may call inanimate. Now, this animate might be merely the body having life. It might be complement of soul and body. It might be a third and different entity formed from both. Okay. So we read, translates, he says of the text, and always indicate the reference to Plato, whose name does not appear in the translation except where it was written by Plotinus.